Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Kennedy, no.
The yeas are 47, the nays are 53. The motion is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a motion to commit at the desk.
Clerk will report.
The Senator from Colorado, Mr. Bennett, moves to commit the bill H.R. 1 to the Committee on Finance of the Senate with instructions to report the same back to the
I
Senate.
ask that further reading of the motion be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. The legislation we're debating today would modestly increase the size of the child tax credit while leaving out more than 17 million children from the full credit. America's poorest children, whose families are struggling to make ends meet, receive nothing from this bill. Everywhere I go in Colorado, I meet parents who are working hard, often 2 and 3 jobs, just to keep their families' heads above water. Like Americans all across this country, Mr. President, they are wrestling with the legacy of 50 years of trickle-down economics that have benefited the wealthiest Americans while leaving working and middle-class families behind, which this bill does again. Today, the United States boasts one of the highest childhood poverty rates in the industrialized world. This is a moral disgrace, but we know how to end childhood poverty in this country. In 2021, we expanded the child tax credit and our childhood poverty. We cut it nearly in half and hunger by a quarter.
The Senator's time's expired.
Thank you, Mr. President. We should refuse to pass a bill that adds millions to our debt in order to cut taxes for the wealthiest while doing nothing for our kids. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment to the bill.
Thanks,
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, the Democrats contend that they want to increase and expand the child tax credit and ensure that big corporations and ultra-wealthy pay their fair share. Despite the rhetoric behind these claims, I remind my colleagues that Republicans created the child tax credit, expanded its availability, and doubled the amount of the credit in the TCJA, which we are working on tonight. This bill not only makes that doubled child tax credit permanent, but also increases it, providing significant relief for families. In addition, as a result of the TCJA cutting taxes for overwhelmingly the majority of Americans, with the middle class receiving the largest proportional benefit of these cuts, Republicans made the tax code more progressive, not less. The legislation before us makes those tax provisions permanent. Americans deserve more than empty platitudes. They deserve meaningful tax relief and real results.
Hello, Jomon JR. How are you? Where are you watching right now? Where are you watching right now, Jomon?
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a second?
Thank you, guys.
There appears to be. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. Ms. Baldwin.
I'm fine. How about you? Where are you watching right now? Dreams. Okay. Lunchtime there in California. Florida.
Got you.
Where are you now, Jomon?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Missouri. Thanks. Thanks for coming.
I got you. Very good. Thank you. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn.
Hello. Oh yeah, German?
Mr. Blumenthal.
Casey Moore. Okay.
Ms. Blunt Rochester. Mr. Booker. Mr. Toe.
Mr. Joe. Mr.
Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan.
What?
Mr. Hawley.
Thank you. Oh my God. Senate holds marathon vote on agenda bill.
A solution on this. So therefore, I ask my colleagues to join me in striking section 40012. Vote yes. Let's pass this bill. Let's get everybody off to July 4th and a happy Independence Day. I ask for the yeas and nays.
Hold on. Is there a sufficient second?
No, it's a news.
Yep.
It's a news. News. You know news? You know news? Oh my God, what's happening? 3 more days till Independence Day. 3 more days.
Not sure where to start when searching for your next home? That's why Bayou's created True Broker. Top agent.
Right now on Capitol Hill, Senate Republicans are working to push President Trump's mega bill over the finish line. We are waiting on senators to start their voting, and we are learning that Majority Leader Thune thinks Republicans have a deal to advance this bill. According to the CBO, this bill would cut around $1 trillion from Medicaid, the health insurance program for low-income and disabled people, and nearly 12 million people would lose their coverage over the next decade. One of those people bracing for impact is Allison Chandra, a pediatric nurse whose son Ethan has a rare genetic disorder. It is called heterotaxy syndrome, and that is where abdominal organs form in wrong positions within the body. The family's Medicaid coverage makes Ethan's treatment possible. And Allison Chandra is joining me right now. She is part of Little Lobbyists. It's an organization which advocates for the rights of medically complex and disabled children, of which your dear Ethan is one. But first, I know it's Ethan's 11th birthday. And that's something, Allison, you weren't certain you'd ever see. So this is a super special day to celebrate, and we're applauding you and Ethan. But tell us about Ethan's condition, how Medicaid has made his treatment possible and more financially manageable for your family.
Yeah, so I always say that Medicaid doesn't just make his treatment possible, it made our entire family possible. My husband and I had been volunteering overseas for nearly 6 years when I came home for maternity leave and found out on a prenatal ultrasound that Ethan has heterotaxy.
Oh my God.
It's a rare disease. Any of the internal organs can be missing, misplaced, malformed, or malpositioned. It's one of my favorite pictures of him. And at that appointment, the doctor told me that this is likely incompatible with life. And we were encouraged to terminate the pregnancy at that point. As a person with very deeply held pro-life values, I wanted desperately to choose life for my baby, even despite this diagnosis. And it was Medicaid that made that possible. Because I knew that if I was choosing life for him, I was choosing a life that was going to be very, very expensive, given the healthcare system in our country. He has had now 5 open heart surgeries, multiple hospitalizations, multiple other surgical procedures. I mean, he's had a lifetime of very expensive care, but Medicaid is what allowed me to choose life for him in those first really uncertain days. When no one could give us hope for a future, for an 11th birthday, for a kid in my living room building his birthday Lego set.
And some waving in the background, which is wonderful. So without Medicaid,
already, we're going to the water park.
Without Medicaid, what kinds of things would he not get?
He wouldn't. I don't know that he would be here.
Is it everything?
So Medicaid paid for, at the beginning, the rest of that pregnancy, and it paid for his birth and for his first 2 open heart surgeries. At that point, my husband got his green card. He's Canadian originally, and was able to get a job, and we were able to transition to private insurance. So we are one of the few families really in the heterotaxi world who is able to make do with just private insurance right now.
How are you?
So right now, Medicaid doesn't pay for anything, but because he's doing so well, I'm back at work as a pediatric nurse, and I do home care, and that's paid through Medicaid. So I see every single day kids whose entire lives at home with their families is funded by Medicaid and the services that it provides.
So when you say that, and what you observe, even if it's not applicable to Ethan right now, it has been in the past, what are the things people would miss out on, those people that you treat?
It's everything. Private insurance only does so much, if you even have it. But beyond that, Medicaid covers feeding supplies, it covers incontinence supplies, wheelchairs, doctor's appointments, therapies, surgeries. It covers everything that children need, disabled children need to live at home with their families where they belong.
When you met with your senator, that is Republican John Curtis of Utah, who, by the way,
He's
himself has 6
mine.
children, what was the reaction as you were trying to plead to not cut Medicaid drastically?
I was very disappointed in that meeting, especially since he himself is a physician. I would think that he would understand sort of the importance of this. He was very dismissive of my concerns. He kind of stood over us at the table. He couldn't sit down at the table with my children and I. And basically the message that I received was, it doesn't matter that you're here bringing me the stories of children like your son and children like the ones in Utah that you care for. I'm still going to just vote party line.
Well underway very soon now. Allison Chandler, I want to thank you so much for giving us a face and a family to the situation so many are facing. And again, happy birthday, Ethan. Well done, Mom.
Yeah. I hope you also. Why this?
Migrants trying to earn legal status in the U.S. are required to attend a series of court hearings. But more and more frequently, these court appearances are becoming targets for ICE. Last month, a mother and her 2 children, originally from Honduras, were detained in the hallway after their immigration hearing in Los Angeles. One of those children, a 6-year-old boy with leukemia. He has a 9-year-old sibling. The family is currently being held in Texas and is now suing the administration over their arrest. And joining us now here in the studio is Alora Mukherjee. She is the director of the Immigrant Rights Clinic at Columbia University. She is representing the family. I want to thank you for being here, Alora. So let's get up to speed on, first of all, what happened here? How did this all go down, the arrest and then the detention?
It's worth starting with how the family entered the United States.
Okay.
They are asylum seekers. They waited to enter the United States lawfully. When they crossed into the United States, they were paroled in, meaning that the Department of Homeland Security determined that the family was not a danger to the community and not a flight risk. DHS told the family, come to court on May 29th, 2025 in Los Angeles. That's exactly what this family did. They went to the immigration court in Los Angeles, explained to the judge that they wish to continue with their asylum cases. The Department of Homeland Security moved to close their cases. The judge granted that motion. As the family stepped out of the courtroom, there were men waiting for them, dressed in civilian clothing. The men arrested them, detained them, and took them down to a first-floor area of the Los Angeles courthouse. There, the family was detained for hours. They were in tears. They were crying. They were told they couldn't go home. They were told they couldn't make a phone call. Then the family was taken to a second detention area in Los Angeles, where they were held for about 11 hours overnight. At one point while the family was there, an ICE official lifted his shirt, displaying a gun. That terrified the 6-year-old boy.
Yeah.
He urinated on himself. He was left in wet clothing for hours until the family was put on a flight to San Antonio the next morning, and now the family is detained at the Dilley Detention Center in Texas.
I just want to back up. So you said that the judge in that court hearing, to which they were compelled to show up, and they did, they followed the rules. That judge said what about their case? They were granting?
The judge granted the motion to dismiss by the Department of Homeland Security. So last month, 3 memos went out that have played into the lives of this family and hundreds, if not thousands, of others. So the DHS attorneys in immigration court were told dismiss the cases of people who are coming before the court. The immigration judges were told grant those motions to dismiss, and ICE was told wait outside the courtrooms to arrest the law-abiding people who show up for their immigration
Which is a direct
court
contradiction.
Absolutely. It is terrifying to immigrant communities who are trying to do everything right, who are trying to comply with the law, who are showing up for their immigration court hearings. Now they are getting arrested for doing the very thing they're supposed to do.
First of all, we've mentioned that the 6-year-old has been battling leukemia. How's he doing? What do we know about the family's whereabouts and how they're doing right now?
The family is in detention. They've been in detention for more than a month now. The little girl and the little boy cry every night and pray to God for God to let them out of the detention center. The 9-year-old has lost her appetite. The 6-year-old barely eats. He has occasional bone pain. He has easy bruising. He is showing concerning symptoms, and his mom is terrified.
Laura, I don't know. I'm glad you are on this case. I'm glad that you're following this and trying to do everything you can. Just very quickly, are you hopeful you'll get them out of detention?
We are doing everything we can to get them out of detention. I've been pleading with the Department of Homeland Security for about a month now to try and get the family released. Last week, we filed a federal habeas petition and complaint for the family, now seeking a federal court's intervention to have the family released from prison.
Laura McCarthy, best of luck with all of that. Let us know how it turns out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What happened? Where is your humanity?
In a world of seismic change, will your business shape the future or be shaped by it? How will we capture the imagination?
Joining us here in the studio right now, we have Minority Leader of the Florida State Senate, Lori Berman. She represents parts of Palm Beach County, Florida. Welcome to you. And the town is, or the area, how is it? Is it Ochopee? Is that it?
I don't even know. It's
like
the Everglades.
Right.
It's an hour from anywhere near. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm awfully glad to have you, because let's talk about who came up with this idea. I believe it was the Attorney General of the state of Florida, and you have made your concerns known. Let's talk about that.
I mean, we have so many concerns about this project that's moving at warp speed. This only started a little over 1 week ago that the Attorney General announced we were going to have this project. There are ethical concerns, there are environmental concerns, there are financial concerns. So we wrote a letter to the Attorney General asking him a series of questions, and of course, we haven't heard anything back yet. My biggest concern right now is probably the ethical concern about this facility in the middle of the Everglades, which, as you mentioned, has a wide variety of environmental issues with alligators, snakes, mosquitoes, extreme heat, extreme humidity. And who are the people who we're bringing to this area? We don't, we were told by President Trump that they're only going to round up criminals. It doesn't appear that that's what's happening now in America. And are these people going to get due process when they come to this migrant facility that they're building in the Everglades? What is going to happen? Where is our humanity? We just heard about President Trump talking about how to escape from an alligator.
Well, I mean,
which is just
you
crazy.
Can't take what he was saying.
This whole thing is stranger than fiction. The author Carl Hyacin, who writes a lot of books about the Everglades, said he couldn't even come up with an idea as warped as this idea.
So let's talk about the facility again, Bill, just very, very quickly. So here's what it includes. There are heavy-duty tents there. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, hurricane season's coming. There's that. They're trailers. They're temporary buildings. But, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's hospitable for people. Are you going to pay a visit there?
I hope to pay a visit. That was one of the questions we raised. Will lawmakers be able to visit this facility? It doesn't sound like we just started hurricane season in the state of Florida. And they're putting this facility right in the middle of an area that is prone to hurricanes. What's going to happen if there's a hurricane? And what they're doing is they're using the same kind of buildings we use after a hurricane. That's what the makeshift buildings are. They're facilities that are put in place to help people after a hurricane, not to withstand a hurricane.
Yeah, absolutely. So Florida Republicans and state leaders, they, I'm sure, have argued with you about all this. They're saying, look, this is going to be a deterrent, correct, for all these undocumented immigrants. It's surrounded by the alligators, the pythons. You've got the mosquitoes and probably the lack of netting to protect them from that. You have the executive director of the state GOP even posting this on X. Here's the quote. They can't get stuck in a hurricane if they self-deport. I mean, the sass here, true, yes, but when you look at this and you see the Florida Republican Party is profiting as well off of this, how so?
So they're selling koozies and T-shirts that say Alligator Alcatraz. So they're commodifying these people's lives. These are individuals. I think so often when something like this performative political theater happens that they forget that these are individuals and these are our
Moments ago, the episode titled Steve Bannon's Battle for the Soul of MAGA. In it, Bannon talks to Jeremy about what he says are the three pillars of the Make America Great Again movement: free trade, immigration, and military intervention. Always outspoken, fair to say, Steve Bannon, but particularly now talking about Elon Musk and some of his frustrations with the president and his relationships with people that Bannon and his allies view as oligarchs. They're sort of the enemy of their movement.
Right, I think Bannon calls them the broligarchs. But the question that people like Steve Bannon have been raising about the direction of the MAGA agenda is, who is this for? Right? Is it for the Trump voters who put him there? Or is it from Elon Musk, who also kind of put Trump there in bankrolling this large outside political operation? Right now, Trump has spent a lot of time listening to the people who have the money, the access, the influence to get a seat in the Roosevelt Room with him. What I think a lot of people in the populist right are concerned about is just how much Trump is willing to give away to appease interests like Elon Musk, interests like big donors, interests like big agriculture, like big restaurants, hospitality, because we know they've been lobbying Trump to dial back on some of his provisions that are most important to the MAGA base, like the deportations. Industries got in Trump's ear and tried to convince him to roll back deportations. They got in his ear and they convinced him that it would be a good idea to bomb Iran. These things all kind of lead to a slippery slope where folks like Bannon are concerned that this starts to look like just another traditional Republican presidency after a while. I mean, if they pass a bill like this that cuts taxes as deeply as it has, as it likely will, for the wealthy at the expense of programs that benefit MAGA voters like Medicaid. I mean, Bannon has said MAGA's on Medicaid, right? I mean, the voters are ultimately going to pay a price for a lot of what's in this bill, so it doesn't really, in a lot of ways, fulfill this promise that Trump has made that I am your voice, I am here standing up for you.
It's always been interesting that the populist, self-described populist, Donald Trump of the MAGA movement, one of his signature achievements, and this isn't new, it's from 2017, is a massive tax cut for the wealthy. So it sounds like Bannon worries about Donald Trump himself almost alienating sections of his own movement.
Well, and you saw that start to happen during the debate over going into Iran. And there were people like Bannon, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, like Matt Gaetz, who are saying, you know, you're going to lose a lot of voters, because when we think about the Trump coalition and his rise to power, his total domination of the Republican establishment after 2016, you think about his appeal to the white working class, right? On these issues like immigration and trade. China's ripping us off. We're a stupid country. We're being taken advantage of. You know, build the wall, all that. But what you don't think about is the impact of what Trump said about foreign wars and how he went after the Bushes. And I've heard Joe talk about this a lot, just mercilessly mocked the Bushes for going into Iraq twice. And Trump said, I would never do something like that. Well, that appealed to his to what became this like working class base. And that message really carried forward into 2024 in a way that helped Trump get record numbers of Black and Hispanic voters along for the ride with him. I think what people like Bannon and the more MAGA populist right would say is, you're putting that coalition, this very fragile MAGA coalition, diverse as it is, as uninterested in politics as a lot of these people are, you're risking alienating them and driving them out of the MAGA tent. So the next time Trump isn't on the ballot, they just don't show up unless Trump delivers on his promise to not be that traditional Republican president who gets us into wars and listens to lobbyists when they come to him and say, no, your immigration laws are too tough.
You can hear the full conversation on the latest episode of The Daily. It's available to stream now. Jeremy and Steve Bannon. Jeremy is, of course, the national reporter for the New York Times. Jeremy, thanks. Always good to see you.
Thanks, Willie.
Still ahead on
Steve Bannon's battle for the soul of MAGA. Steve Bannon, dangerous. What is this dangerous? Wow.
Here in the nation's capital, protesters came out yesterday to demonstrate against President Trump's reconciliation bill. Their goal, putting a real face to the potential consequences of Congress's actions.
last year I was able to get back in school. I just graduated high school. I'm looking to attend CVCC. I'm doing an auto technician systems program in August. I'm relying on Medicaid and SNAP to help me continue my schooling. If I do not have it, I could go to school and I'd have to worry about not being able to eat that day. I was receiving Medicaid until I did what you, state and local representatives, said to do, go to work.
My God.
Struggling just to walk or do daily simple but not so simple tasks, I went to work. I did everything you all told me to do, state and local representatives. You pulled a whammy on me, and you took my Medicaid away.
My life is not a waste. My life is not fraudulent. Wanting to live a full life is not taking advantage of the system. I pray that they choose to not kill the people they represent.
Those stories and that protest was part of the ongoing Moral Mondays demonstrations, which are scheduled all summer long to highlight the human cost of some of the planned cuts to social programs like Medicaid. Joining us now, Reverend Dr. William J. Barber. He's co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign and the leader of the Repairers of the Breach, the group that organizes the Moral Monday protests. Reverend Doctor, thank you for joining us. I wonder if you can talk to us more about the stories that you've heard from people who are coming out, braving heat in a lot of these cases at these protests, to just try to get lawmakers to understand what the impact is going to be for them, an impact that isn't Republican or Democrat, it's just on people.
It's just life. I mean, these people, we've been screaming since Ash Wednesday and saying to the faith community, we should have been out long earlier than this, because Elena was literally risking her life yesterday. She didn't know she would have an aneurysm. His son is a quadriplegic, and there are thousands of people like that that testified. Millions of people tuned in yesterday. Almost 1,000 people joined us. We had 51 caskets. Because 51,000 people, according to studies at Yale and Penn, will die in the first year of this bill because it is a policy murder and policy violence. This bill is morally indefensible. It cuts more than 16 million people from health care unnecessarily just to give money to the greedy and the wealthy who don't need it. This is a damnable, destructive, ugly, deadly, violent bill. It is constitutionally inconsistent because these people swore to provide for the general welfare of all people and to ensure justice. There's no justice about this. And this bill is economically insane. I mean, the amount of money that's being transferred from poor and working people to the wealthy that don't need it. This is the biggest transfer of wealth that was was transferred from the slave master, from the slaves to the slave master. I mean, this is civilizational changing stuff. This is harmful, and then I almost cry when I sit there and look at Hurley, how she risked her life yesterday to come from West Virginia. And what we're saying to Democrats is, this is who you should be putting on. These are the people we should be showing America. This doesn't have a damn thing, to do with Democrat and Republican and white and black and North and South. We're talking about passing a piece of legislation that's going to kill people year after year after year after year, and it is morally indefensible.
You know, Reverend Barber, I think there are a lot of, Simone, how are you? There are a lot of people out there who, because they are close to the issue, whether we're talking about the healthcare piece of this, whether we're talking about the SNAP benefits, I know the coffins you all had yesterday had also numbers of how many people from each state would be affected by the loss of supplemental food assistance. I think the people closest to this issue that have been engaged, that anybody has told them about it, they are rightfully riled up and upset about this. They cannot believe that their elected officials would do this. But there are also so many people out there that could potentially be affected, and that will be affected by this bill when it goes through, devastating effects that have no idea. How are you taking your message to some of these people in some of the most remote places across this country that you have organized in for a very long time, so that they are aware of what is happening and what the consequences would be if this legislation goes through?
Well, you're right, Simone. We've been cross-posting everywhere. We've got people in 42 different states. We've done over 200 hours of calling, letting impacted people do the calling. And you're right. You're talking about millions of people losing their food stamps, their SNAP. At the time, we got these high grocery big prices. And you're talking about all of this being done for the love of money, which is evil. And that's why our movement is focused on poor and low-wage people, you know, the most powerful potential voting bloc in the country, if we can mobilize. But what we've said to many of our politicians, and we're glad you all are doing this, MSNBC, is too often the politicians are talking and not making the stage for the impacted people. Right now, I would say to politicians, you need to get all these impacted people to Capitol Hill. You need to get them in the galleries. You need to do everything you can to put a face on this, because most Americans don't agree with this, but the more they see it, and then on top of that, when they know this bill passes, your rural hospital closes. So you might be 25 miles from a hospital now. This bill passes, you might be 200 miles from a hospital. That means that you are outside of what's called the 1 hour golden hour. If you have a heart attack, you have an hour. You could die just because your hospital moved. And we saw that in North Carolina when North Carolina for years refused to expand Medicaid. Hospital after hospital was closed. Simone, I met a lady who died in a parking lot waiting on a helicopter because the hospital had been moved from right around the corner from where she lived. And she was white, a former Republican, but her husband and her were angry at Trump and the Republicans and changed their tune before she died. But she suffered the consequence. This bill, and I say it clearly, we know you use policy murder. That's what this is. People don't like that term, but when you know something is going to kill people and you do it anyway, and you do it in a rush, you do it in the dark, and they have refused to allow hearings. America, hear this. They won't even allow the experts and impacted people to come to Capitol Hill and say what's going on in formal hearings. That's how dangerous and deadly these bills are. And that's why Tillis and Musk are turning on. And what my prayer is, because, you know, they arrested us for praying. They need to be arrested for preying, Preying, on the poorest and the most vulnerable people in this country. But they're turning on each other. And our prayer is that that will happen more and more, because there's no excuse. When people start dying, nobody will be able to say they did not know. They know exactly what they wanted for the love of money.
And you talk about the fact that North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis is expected to vote no on this piece of legislation. We're waiting to see if other Republicans like Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins do that as well. For now, Reverend Dr. William Barber, thank you. Simone Sanders Townsend, thank you as well.
Thank you so much, guys. What's this? Dangerous.
New Schwarzkopf Gliss, nourishing formula with keratin for 100% stronger hair.
Welcome back. President Trump is ramping up his pressure campaign on Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, urging him to cut interest rates by a lot. The president's latest demand came in a handwritten letter held up by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt at a press briefing yesterday. You see her there. Trump penned a message to Powell in Sharpie on a list of world central bank rates, writing in part, quote, "Jerome, you are as usual too late. You have cost the USA a fortune." The president has repeatedly attacked the Fed chair for resisting his demands to lower interest rates, recently encouraging Powell to resign and floating the idea of naming his replacement. Joining us now, senior economic reporter for Axios, Courtney Brown. So you've been reporting on this. This has been one twist of the dial after another between Powell and Trump here. The fact that they are now showing that letter, I think a lot of reporters have also received letters like that in Sharpie, written on newspaper articles that they've written and others in the past. So the fact that he's doing it to the Fed chair, celebrities are just like us, I guess. But what do you read into the way that they are now handling it from the White House podium?
In many ways, this is an old story because we saw the same tenor of attacks during Trump 1.0. But here's what's new. I think the first thing that's new is that this is a whole of administration approach. You have President Trump badgering Fed Chair Jerome Powell.
UAE.
Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary,
UAE,
President Trump's top
nothing
economist,
changed.
Kevin
It's
Hassett,
really hot.
and even Treasury
Even
Secretary
the
Scott
water
Bessent
hot.
to a certain extent, really hammering
You
the
can-
Fed for not cutting interest rates. I mean, we know why the Fed is not
cannot go
cutting
out,
interest
but
rates.
it's
Fed Chair
really,
Jerome
really
Powell
hot.
basically all
know.
but said last week that they would be cutting rates if not for the trade
really
war
hot,
that's created all of this
Margaritas.
uncertainty about whether or not inflation is going to be reignited. We haven't seen it so far, but the Fed is still in wait and see mode because they're so afraid about another inflation shock.
Another inflation shock. And yet, talk about why Trump is pressuring this so hard. What are the economic dominoes that he expects to fall if the Fed falls in line and says, okay, we'll cut rates by a lot, as he said?
This is the other part that's new. The reason that President Trump wants the Fed to cut rates, the administration very much sees the Fed as playing a key role in keeping government interest costs low. And let me just say, that is not the Fed's job. That is like asking the tooth fairy to deliver Christmas presents. It's just not what the Fed does. It is it's two things that don't mix. You never want to see a central bank making interest rate decisions for the sake of the government's expenses. This is a reality that would very much freak out Wall Street and global financial markets.
And so, given the reasoning for the Fed staying much more conservative in their goings-ons about rate cuts, then it brings us back to the trade war, which is still very much active. You're seeing ping pong balls go back and forth between Japan and the U.S., China and the U.S. Apparently that trade deal was signed very quietly. Talk about the latest here. We saw it with Canada earlier this week, the back and forth there. I mean, which of these mini trade wars should we be watching the most closely?
Essentially, we're meant to be having almost a Liberation Day 2.0 next week. That's when the 90-day pause on the first Liberation Day tariffs expires. It sounds like the administration is saying there will be some deals, some countries will receive a letter essentially telling them what they will pay us to do business with the United States, which, if you remember that fateful day in April, that is exactly what happened. They put out a list of tariff rates. Financial markets freaked out. This time around, I think there is this idea among some of the folks I speak to on Wall Street that the president understands what happened a few months back, and there won't be a repeat. There will be threats of higher tariffs, but perhaps they won't come to pass. In the meantime, the economy is chugging along fine. If you look at the macroeconomic data, inflation data is at a 4-year low. That's pretty good. I think the big concern is what happens next, what happens as these tariffs kind of roll through the economy.
Yeah, and I think the question for some who might be looking at jobs reports, you mentioned during the break that we're getting it on Thursday, not the usual Friday because of the July 4th holiday.
Correct.
But at what point do you start seeing this market uncertainty, the chaos of the Trump tariffs that have the Fed and Wall Street so concerned actually show up in the BLS reports and others?
This is the million-dollar question. The other thing I want to point out is that the stock market is at an all-time high. So all of this talk of uncertainty among traders, it very much seems like just talk. They're buying stocks. I mean, there are some warning signs with the U.S. dollar, for instance. There's some fears that global investors are not as giddy about owning U.S. assets like the U.S. dollar because of all of the policy uncertainty. But right now, it's so hard to look at the economy and say, there is this Trump-sized economic shock because the data just doesn't show it, at least not yet.
There might be an economic shock, but not a quantitative shock, at least not showing up yet. Senior economic reporter for Axios, Courtney Brown, always love having you on. The Tooth Fairy, I didn't have her on my bingo card today. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Dangerous. Why is this?
To everyone who has already bought our product. Sorry guys, because now Temu has a £0 promotion. Everything for free. One set, £0.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will visit the White House next Monday, his third trip to Washington during Donald Trump's second term. The visit comes just weeks after the U.S. brokered a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Iran following American airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Since then, attention has returned to Israel's war against Hamas in the Gaza Strip as President Trump renews his push for a ceasefire there and for a hostage release deal. Negotiations over Gaza remain stalled, with both Israel and Hamas holding firm to their demands. Citing local medical officials in Gaza, the New York Times reports an Israeli airstrike hit a beachfront cafe in Gaza City yesterday, killing more than 24 people and injuring dozens of others. Joining us now at the table, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. He's the author of the weekly newsletter Home and Away, available on Substack. Richard, always great to see you, my friend. Morning, Willie. So let's talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to the White House on Monday. You've been writing on Substack lately about this relationship between Donald Trump, where he's shown a willingness to push back against Netanyahu and many of our allies, actually, at times when he thinks it's warranted. So what's sort of hanging in the air as these two men sit together in the Oval Office?
There's lots hanging in the air. I mean, as you said, the United States, America first doesn't necessarily mean Israel first. The president, if you remember, pushed back against Netanyahu on attacking Iran. Israelis wanted to do it too. U.S. had its own deal with the Houthis. They had their own deal with Hamas. You could go on and on. On the other hand, the president is intervening in Israeli politics right now, essentially saying that the legal case against Bibi Netanyahu should be dropped. This is an interesting relationship. President does, if you remember, when he ran, said one of his goals to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza, to bring the hostages back home. You had a deal, which the new administration then and the old administration jointly brought about. Then the Israelis balked at the second phase of it. The whole idea was to get the hostages back, the Israelis would have had to agree to a ceasefire and a pullout from Gaza. So that's still where things stand. So and things have gotten worse, as you just saw on that story. A lot of people are being killed, and the people of Gaza, the 2 million residents, are being packed into ever smaller pieces of territory. So life there is unimaginably awful. So the question is, can now the administration resurrect the basis of a ceasefire?
As you watch this latest beachfront attack, a missile strike in Gaza City, what at this point now is the end game for Bibi Netanyahu? In other words, if President Trump is trying to negotiate a ceasefire and things like this are happening, where does Prime Minister Netanyahu want this to end for Israel? What does he want?
Look, what he wants to do is have this end, but in a manner, Willie, that he can stay on as prime minister and escape his legal consequences. So it's all caught up in that. The good news is that Bibi Netanyahu has more political standing now because of Iran, so he may have a little bit more strength, a little bit more potential to compromise. He would like to get the hostages back. That would be a big win. All Israelis want to see that. The question is, how does he do that in a way that he hasn't eliminated Hamas? Hamas still has a role. And how do you keep order in Gaza? The Israelis still, here it is, it's over a year and a half since October 7th. There's still not a serious plan, a viable plan for what comes afterwards. Right now, the security situation in Gaza is a mixture of Israeli occupation and gangs. Let's be honest. And the question is, how do you get something where the Israelis don't have to be there, Hamas can't revive? The only idea people can think of is some type of an Arab force, but to have an Arab force, you'd have to have a large Palestinian component in that force. Well, that's something the Israelis balk at, because they don't want to do anything in Gaza that would give momentum, that would impart momentum to Palestinian nationalism. So that's been the dilemma all along. And the real question, quite honestly, is how hard does Donald Trump push Bibi Netanyahu? Because right now, if he pushed Bibi Netanyahu, Trump actually is more popular than anybody in Israel. And if the Israelis didn't like what Donald Trump were doing, guess what? Who do they go to here? They're going to go to Chuck Schumer? There's no way to do an end run around Donald Trump. So Trump has enormous leverage big if, he decides to use it on Bibi Netanyahu.
That popularity obviously enhanced by President Trump's decision to attack those nuclear sites inside Iran, and now trying to broker some kind of a conversation between Israel and Iran. What does that even look like in terms of a ceasefire, which is fragile to say the least?
Well, it's fragile, and it doesn't really address the real issue, which is Iran. Right now the Iranians have two goals. One is to make sure the regime survives, and
minutes,
there's been
guys.
really some dark stories coming out of Iran about how they're going around the country looking for anyone who they can think may have been cooperating with Israel or whatever. But
India, thanks.
regime survival is the big thing. The second is whether at some point the Iranians decide what they want to do is reconstitute their nuclear program in a way that it can't be reached by Israeli or American missiles or bombs or what have you. And I think that's a long-term challenge. So even though we talked about obliteration, the reality is we didn't. Elements of the Iranian nuclear program survived in the 3 sites we attacked. Elements of it survived, which were never there, that had been moved out. So I think there's a long-term issue between Iran and both Israel and the United States about what's going to happen with this nuclear program. Can it be resolved diplomatically? That would be a long shot. Can it be dealt with militarily? That might be something necessary down the road. But I think that's where we are. This problem hasn't gone away. It's just reached a new chapter.
Next chapter daw. Sabi niya kasi may 10 minutes pa tayo, guys. So, Republicans failed to explain. What is
Kuwait is the best place to start your industrial business, and Sharjah is the right place to do that. You want...
Governor Kasich, I want to start with you as a lifelong principled conservative, a guy who ran a state, who understands the impact of a lot of the stuff, a lot of the cuts that are being talked about in this package, particularly to Medicare and to Medicaid and what that might do to rural hospitals. When you look at a bill this big with this much in it, how do you feel as a guy who served on the Hill, but also as a guy who ran a state?
Well, first of all, I was chairman of the budget committee when we balanced the budget in the, last time it happened since man walked on the moon. So, look, I knew this was going to pass. I knew they were going to cobble stuff together. But the problem we have here long term is that we are racing towards the edge of a cliff when it comes to this national debt, which continues to go up. So I have great concerns that, first of all, when you take a look at Medicaid, Medicare, the health care programs, they need to be done together. There needs to be a complete reform of the health care system in the United States, and you do that by locking the doctors, the hospitals, the insurance companies, the pharma companies in a room and say, let's begin to treat people to keep them healthy rather than treating them when they're sick. A fundamental reform of health care. Secondly, frankly, we do need a balanced budget amendment so that Congress operates like the states. With this national debt growing so high, Willie, I have to tell you, at some point, people around the world will stop buying our debt. And when that happens, we run a printing press. And we run a printing press, it causes inflation. Every family will be hurt and some will be devastated. So, look, this is where we are now. There's no appetite for being able to fundamentally reform the federal government. And one other thing, I think the Republicans have failed to be able to define the why of this bill. If you're going to do something that's significant, you have to tell people why you're going to do it. And then once they understand why you're going to do it, or at least they get a sense of why you're going to do it, then I think you have more support for getting done what you want to get done. But this bill's going to pass. But it's another effort to kick the can down the road when it comes to the tremendous fiscal problems that we're facing in this country.
So, Governor, putting on your governor's hat for just a minute, can you talk about some of the concerns expressed, particularly by Senator Susan Collins in Maine, about what almost $1 trillion in cuts to Medicaid means to rural hospitals, what it would mean in the state of Ohio? Just on the ground, practically, what do these cuts mean to a state like yours?
Well, Willie, it's not an easy question to answer because it's complicated. In a nutshell, when I became governor, we grew the Medicaid program by 4.5%, while I expanded Medicaid and added 600,000 people. Before I was governor, it grew at 10%, and now it's growing more than 10%. And that's because we managed the program in such a way that we made fair payments to people who were providing Medicaid. In other words, fundamental reform of how Medicaid worked in Ohio worked for us. If all you're going to do is go and slash without being able to engineer the proper way to make sure that you can reduce some spending while at the same time saving those people who are the most vulnerable, that's a mistake. So as the governor, by reducing the growth of Medicaid, I was able to expand it and at the same time have it grow at a lower rate. I mean, more than half the rate that it's been growing before I was governor and after. So the reason it's a complicated answer to your question is there are ways to reform this system where you can significantly change it and reshape it without having to hurt vulnerable people. I don't know what the level of this is going to be or how they're going to deal with it. If you're going to phase in this provider tax in such a way, you need to do it over time because